when it comes to your customers, like you as a marketer need to be where your customers are at, full stop. So where are they searching for the type of product or service that you sell, or the questions that you answer? And that's what we need to figure out. We're not going to have the data that we would want. Like, we wish that we had full transparency into ChatGPT and what was going on and mentions of our brand. That's not going to happen. Same thing with Copilot and Perplexity and other generative AI search engines. Like, it's just not going to happen. We can look at refer data, so we can start to piece that together. But it's still tough. Like, I think it really gets back to talking to your customers. When someone called my agency, we used to ask them, how did you hear about us? And they would say, oh, it was the internet, or my friend Bob told me about your SEO agency. But now we're trying to probe a little deeper. How did you search for an SEO agency? And they might say Google. They might say, well, I didn't know anything about SEO. I opened up ChatGPT before I did a search on Google or something like that to find one in my local area. But talking to people to figure out how the search behavior is changing in your market among your customers is going to be important, because it might be, and it probably is, the fact that your customers, 99% of them that were on Google 2 years ago are still on Google, still searching on Google now. Like, that's the case in most markets right now. But the question is, like, are you as a marketer going to know when your customer search behavior starts to change? And are you going to know what platforms you need to start targeting?
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Lee with the eMarketing Association. I also run Did It, a company that started in SEO in 1996, before Google even existed. I also run Truth Nutrition, a nonprofit called Giving Forward. But search marketing is a thread that runs across a lot of the things that I work on, regardless of which of my ventures or brands it is. So I'm super excited to be chatting with Dale Bertrand today, who lives into the intersection of SEO best practices and AI optimization, or LLMO, if you want to call it that. He runs Fire&Spark. So Dale, let's start with that intersection between SEO and AI, right? It used to be that people only had to worry about a SERP and a search engine results page, and now they have to sort of worry about chatbots too. So for those folks who are starting to obsess about chatbots and not just SERPs, what should they do about it?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and thank you for having me on here. There's a lot going on, as you know, with AI. We've been focused on how we're using AI for SEO, but then also, as you said, how we're optimizing for chatbots and generative AI. Really, the first thing is to understand what your visibility is now, thinking about what types of searches you want to show up for, and then also understanding that these are conversations, not searches. So what types of conversations do you want to be mentioned in your brand, and then test it out on a variety of different platforms, Search GPT, Chat GPT, see how you're showing up in Google's AI overviews, try Perplexity and see what's showing up. And I guarantee you, once you do that, you will see some unexpected things and probably some low-hanging fruit that you can fix, where you didn't know that you still had this page about, or I'll give you an example. When I did this for my agency, Fire&Spark, we're an SEO agency, there was some information coming up about strategies that we had promoted and run for clients, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, that needed to be erased from the web because they're just not what we're doing now, right? So that's really the first step. See what's coming up. You'll find some low-hanging fruit. There's some information you might want to erase from the web, or maybe some information you might want to correct or add to your website so that it has a more accurate idea of what you're doing now. And that's really the first step.
Right, absolutely. It's sort of interesting because, at the various SEO conferences, and including, probably the most recent two were PubCon and the Brighton SEO conference here in San Diego in the States. Of course, there seems like there's an SEO conference somewhere all the time. But, people have been really talking about how, to some extent, the chatbot revolution of AI as a sort of augmentation for search has sort of been great for the SEO community because it's redoubled the importance of content creation. It's redoubled the importance of great content. And to some extent, it's sort of made digital PR a focus for a lot of folks as well. So you've got sort of plenty of work to keep the SEO community busy, maybe except for some of the folks who only do exclusively site-side, on-page optimization. Although you could make an argument that even that has implications with regards to crawlability. So for folks who are looking to sort of future-proof their visibility, are there any sort of low-hanging fruit areas that you find that people should take advantage of right out of the gate?
And I hope you appreciate the answer of it depends. Like, it really depends on where you're at. There are a number of brands that are already established. So they have content, they have authority with Google and search engines. And for them, what I recommend is looking at the content you already have and updating it, making sure that you're refreshing it, keeping it up to date, all of that good stuff. So you can just call that a big keep, kill, combine project on the content that you already have. There are a number of brands that might be, I guess an example would be like a lead gen site, maybe in the auto space. Let's say, I'm making this up, but buyafriendlycarhere.com, that have nothing going for them other than the content on their website and maybe some backlinks. But the problem is they don't have a brand, and Google's doing its best to measure that brand equity and the mind share that you have as a brand, in order to determine, like, hey, are you Geico or are you buy insurance here because I need the money to pay my rent.com? Like, very big difference there. So I really think what we're seeing is narrowing the playing field so that there are players that have the resources to do SEO right, and there are players that have the brand to do SEO. And then there's everybody else. And a lot of them, just SEO is no longer the right channel.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think probably the shot across the bow for the SEO is not the right channel for investment, is the helpful content update, right? Because I think to some extent that was Google's engineers' way of telling folks that, if it's content that's just regurgitated and AI generated, it's probably not that helpful, and it's not going to rank. Right. So, of course, some of the stuff that got deranked in the helpful content update was, in fact, human generated, but still was crappy. And of course,
yeah, we always talk about, like, do you deserve to rank? So imagine somebody calling me, like, I run an SEO agency, and they call me and they say, hey, Dale, I heard you're really good at SEO. What can you do to fix my site? And then I take a look at it, I'm like, oh, I can't help you. And they're like, why? I thought you were the best in the world at SEO. And I say, well, the problem is your site doesn't deserve to rank in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's not going to happen. Even if you can tweak it or somehow trick Google, Google's going to figure it out eventually. And it's just not the right strategy for you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think SEO, at least in the last 5 or 6 years, has become a true meritocracy, right? Whereas you can't really fool the algorithms anymore because they've got enough feedback loops, whether it's people hitting the back button or dwell time on site or a whole bunch of other things that will tell the algorithm, listen, this page is not worthy of the rank that it's got. So even if you happen to somehow be able to achieve a rank you don't deserve, it's probably a short-term scenario, right? And there may be black hat folks who would disagree. But the black hat folks tend to, burn and churn with their domains for the most part anyway, and are not brands that are investing for the long term. Right now, do you feel like there are folks showing up in the chatbot results that don't belong?
So that's really hard to say because I'm not doing a lot of brand searches with chatbots. The types of searches that I'm doing is for information. So I'll go to, like, ChatGPT or Perplexity. Well, so I'll go to Perplexity when I'm looking for information. I'll go to ChatGPT when I'm basically searching with my own information for creativity purposes, or reformat something or write something. And then I'll go to Google when I'm looking for websites or web pages, which is what it's good for. So in terms of, like, people coming up that may or may not deserve it, I mean, definitely in Google. I mean, I think I hate to say this because I make my living optimizing for Google, but the quality of the results feels like it's going downhill. I don't think it's the quality of Google's algorithm that's going downhill. I think it's just there's so much more crap out there on the web that they have to deal with and filter out. That's why they keep raising the bar. But the experience that you have on Google isn't that great. And now they're making changes with Google's AI overviews and some new features that are coming out. And you can kind of see where this is all headed, where we as searchers and consumers in general are going to slowly get trained to use a variety of different search engines. So a constellation of search engines. If I'm looking for how-to, I might look on on YouTube for how-to. I might look on Amazon if I'm looking for a product. I might go to Google if I'm looking for a business or a transaction. I might go to Perplexity if I'm doing research, looking for information. So we're all just starting to learn what's good for what, and I'm sure that the line between them will blur. But what I'm expecting, all these different players that are trying to attract search traffic to make their business models work, they're going to gravitate towards one use case that they're really good at, and that's the use case that they own. That's how they get their traffic, as opposed to what we've been used to for the last couple of decades, which is just Google it. Well, that's not going to be the answer anymore.
One of the fascinating byproducts of that is we all talk about YouTube as being sort of a search engine for video, right? And perhaps the second largest search engine in the world, right? If you think about it from a visibility perspective. And of course, that had been a stimulus for a lot of folks who maybe hadn't considered creating video content previously to saying, oh, I should really include video content as one of my content types, assuming that I have anything interesting to put on there. But now, we're starting to see the beginnings of, okay, well, Gemini is probably crawling YouTube transcripts, right, and ingesting that content, but they're probably not letting ChatGPT crawl the YouTube transcripts. So you have sort of an asymmetry with regards to your content creation and content syndication planning, right? So maybe that content that you created on YouTube, in the case of, for example, this video podcast, we'll put it in audio form on Spotify and iTunes, right? So that may end up in ChatGPT and Claude, and therefore Perplexity, right? And so you end up with this really interesting scenario where, as you think about your content creation and your content syndication plan, it's more complex than the old Barnacle SEO strategy, right? The Barnacle SEO strategy obviously was, oh, I'm going to grab as much of the SERP as I can with positive mentions of my brand, right? Maybe one click away from me, or even if there's not a hard click, at least it was a positive discussion of my brand or a positive discussion of my product that ranked somewhere else. Now all that stuff also feeds the AI, right? So your content syndication strategy, I think, is more complex. At least I think of it as more complex than it used to be.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to have as much control over it, because there are definitely brands that think they can basically block crawlers from including their content and training data. And for all the reasons you just said, Kevin, like it'll end up in the training data one way or another. And one of the ways it'll end up is because the platforms just don't care if you choose to try to take it out, right? Like we know that both OpenAI and Google are training their Sora model and their video models on YouTube videos, when the terms of service didn't allow that for a long time. I don't know if Google's updated it, and I don't know if they could do that retroactively, but they don't care. It's really just they're going to go after the training data that they need to make the right product. And then when it comes to your customers, like you as a marketer need to be where your customers are at, full stop. So where are they searching for the type of product or service that you sell, or the questions that you answer? And that's what we need to figure out. We're not going to have the data that we would want. Like we wish that we had full transparency into ChatGPT and what was going on and mentions of our brand. That's not going to happen. Same thing with Copilot and Perplexity and other generative AI search engines. Like it's just not going to happen. We can look at refer data, so we can start to piece that together. But it's still tough. Like I think it really gets back to talking to your customers. When someone called my agency, we used to ask them, how did you hear about us? And they would say, oh, it was the internet, or my friend Bob told me about your SEO agency. But now we're trying to probe a little deeper. How did you search for an SEO agency? And they might say Google. They might say, well, I didn't know anything about SEO. I opened up ChatGPT. before I did a search on Google or something like that to find one in my local area. But talking to people to figure out how the search behavior is changing in your market among your customers is going to be important because it might be, and it probably is, the fact that your customers, 99% of them that were on Google 2 years ago are still searching on Google now. Like that's the case in most markets right now. But the question is, like, are you as a marketer going to know when your customer search behavior starts to change, and are you going to know what platforms you need to start targeting?
Yeah, that's a great point. Obviously, content creation discussions wouldn't be complete without talking about social media, which is where a lot of the content these days is being created for, right? So you may be creating content in one video format for YouTube and potentially, using a shorter version of that video on TikTok, or maybe you're not using it on TikTok because you think, oh, TikTok's not for me as a brand. But you certainly have to think about, the social media uh, assets, because those are probably getting crawled as training data as well. So, it's almost like in the old days of PR, you would get a PR hit and never worry about the long-term visibility of that. And of course, eventually PR agencies said, wait a minute, this is going to be on the New York Times website for a long time. I should probably think about it more holistically than just getting a PR hit. And then the same way, now we've got sort of like, oh, is a tweet dead like 10 minutes after you tweet it, or does it live on? Right. And certainly folks who've gotten in trouble for saying something they shouldn't have learned the lesson. Oh no, that tweet's there for a while, right? Because it gets dug up later on by somebody. But are there SEO and AI implications to your social media content strategy that people should think about?
I would love to throw out there that we don't know, and it's really all about staying agile, because you can imagine a future where Elon Musk, with his Grok AI that is trained in real time on Twitter, or sorry, they call it X now, I think. They're trained on X's, not tweets, whatever they call them. It's the right, or you could imagine that that's the right conversational generative AI, chatbot to target for a certain audience, but not the right for another audience. So you really have to be careful, because these conversations are so dependent on the direction that the technology goes, because there's a whole constellation of different generative AI search platforms, and then also how the customer behavior in your market shifts, and where you need to go to find your customers.
For sure. Yeah. Let's talk about AI as a tool in the SEO and content creators toolbox, right? Obviously, the temptation is to just, stop using the human copywriter and let a chatbot do the work for you. But many people have sort of learned the lesson the hard way about, the risks associated with doing that, whether it's hallucinations or just regurgitated content. So how do you recommend that, a savvy strategist, content strategist, take advantage of this tool in their tool set, with knowing where the line is, like, where let's say, the roles and responsibilities of the human content creator versus the chatbot?
Yeah, this really reminds me back when I was hiring programmers. So I did some client work in the technology space a while back, and I literally had a free programmer that was an intern. We didn't pay, but then we had, $100 an hour, $200 an hour programmer. And what I learned is to hire the most expensive contract programmer that I could find that was worth their hourly rate. If I could find one worth 500, but that charges $500 an hour and they're actually worth it, I would do that all day, every day, because I'm getting maximum productivity for my dollar. Now, when it comes to using AI for SEO or for content specifically, I want to hire the best writer I can who is proficient in these tools, or at least willing to learn, because that's how I'm going to get the most out of my content dollar. And I'm going to get much better quality content and quantity. I'm going to get more content. Pairing an expert writer with these tools than I am like the writer on their own, or even the tools on their own. So I think that's really the sweet spot. Hire the best writer you possibly can, pay them what they're worth as long as they're worth it. And and make sure that they're getting the most out of these tools. And that's really the sweet spot.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've certainly seen behavior over the years, which of course in aggregate shows that the number of keywords in a search query has changed over time, and therefore that has changed the SEO strategies, right, from a content creation perspective. Do you anticipate that people's prompt engineering skills are going to change over time as the chatbots themselves change? So, I've already sort of changed how I use Perplexity, for example. The way I used it the first week, I discovered it sort of different than the way I use it now, having sort of learned what it's good at, right? And so the human is changing their behavior as they improve the platforms itself. So I don't know if that's a cat and mouse game that we don't know where it lands yet, or sort of which came first. Is a human changing their behavior based on the chatbot, or is a chatbot adapting its algorithms based on what the humans are telling it?
And yeah, I think we do know where this is going. Like if you think back a long time ago, we had the yellow pages where you would open a physical book, find a bunch of phone numbers, call all the photographers in your area, one of them call you back. And that book taught us to search that way for a local business. Then we had Google, which was a lot better. But what Google taught us was to search using this esoteric kind of query language, like ice cream shop near me, or I don't know, best haircut Boston. Like that's not natural language. But the promise of generative AI is that when we're looking for information or a local business, we can have a conversation that feels natural. So it feels like talking to an expert. So if I'm going to Seattle, I'm talking to somebody who lives there or who has lived there. And I can say, hey, I'm going to Seattle. I'm going there on business, but I want to do something fun. I'm going to meet a client, and this is my best client, so I don't want to pay a lot of money for lunch. But where do you think I should go for lunch? By the way, I'm lactose intolerant. And like I said, I don't have a big budget for this particular client. But anyway, you're having a conversation with it, and it feels more natural, and it feels like a friend who used to live in Seattle or an expert in that area. And I think that's where the puck is going. That's the way our customers are going to search for the information that they need to make a buying decision. That's how they're going to search for our businesses and our brands. And we're going to notice that queries are getting longer. We're going to notice that our customers are asking follow-up questions because they're getting trained to do that. But it's less about this esoteric, chatbot language, and more about the ability to use natural language.
Right. Yeah, that's a valid point. You've mentioned earlier that, sometimes when folks call you and sort of ask for help with SEO, you'll actually sort of advise them that perhaps, you won't be able to invest enough to move the needle, right, to make it a valid investment choice for your business. But it takes me back to the early days of the web when people sort of said, well, the web is the great equalizer, right, between the big business, the medium-sized business, and the small business. Now sort of everybody can be on the internet, and geography doesn't matter as much anymore. And where we seem to have ended up now is that the deeper pockets can win in a lot of these platforms, right? So they can win in search because their domains have the authority, for lack of a better term, but they've got the brand, right, and the brand recognition as a result of not just investment in SEO, but investment in all these other media types, so that their domain is just more likely to get clicked as Expedia, right, in the travel category, for example. And so that creates sort of this asymmetry, right, where if you're like a smaller player or a newer player or a smaller business in a category, you have a very difficult decision to make with regards to marketing and human capital allocation, right? Regardless of whether that's content creation or SEO or, paid media, et cetera. So when somebody comes to you and they're sort of in that position, it may not be a David versus Goliath situation, but it's a situation where there's, there are folks in front of them in the race, right? And so they'd have to run really, really fast to catch up with these folks. And these other folks are not slow, right? They've invested in SEO for 10 years, or they've invested in content marketing for 10 years, or they have a significant social media profile, et cetera, et cetera. So when somebody's sort of an underdog in a category, right? How do you advise them other than saying, sorry, I can't help you, right? Is there a
That's
viable
very
path for them as a business, right? To sort of, you know, equalize the playing field, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I think it really starts with understanding like why the bigger established businesses have that preference in the first place. And the reason why is consumer preferences. Like at the end of the day, Google's trying to show people what people want to see when they're searching. If I search for insurance, I expect to see Geico. And if Geico's not there, then Google is broken. Because Geico, with its, I don't know how much they spend on advertising, but it's a lot because I see Geico ads everywhere, right? So that's why I expect to see Geico. And if I don't, like, that's a problem. So if you're a small player or a new player in that space, you need to do what small businesses have always needed to do, which is to do something extraordinary, something remarkable to break through. At the very least, you need to treat your customers well. And Google will notice. You'll get reviews, you'll get positive write-ups online, you'll get backlinks, you'll get engagement with your website. People will go to your website and stay there. They'll return to your website. These are all technical artifacts that Google can notice when you run a good business with a good product, good quality service, and you treat your customers right so that they come back. That's the starting point. That's like step zero. And then from there, you need to be a good business that is a good, remarkable business so that you can break through. And that's always been the case. It just so happens that we had this moment of time where Google didn't work so well. And a small business that honestly consumers didn't really want to see or expect to be there would show up. And Google's fixed that. And now it's harder for small businesses, just like it's always been. But that means that small businesses need to break through in order to move their way up.
Right. Yeah. Again, I guess it's the meritocracy, right? So you have to be differentiated and provide value to your customers, and sort of that. Then you'll get the rising tide, which will end up including search and social media visibility and all the other stuff that comes
Yeah, and
along.
it comes down to like, what are you doing that's not search that's going to get you noticed?
Right.
Even if it's word of mouth, even if it's referral customers, but it might be PR or other channels or events or whatever it is that you're doing to be a remarkable business. But it's that word remarkable that matters. And before the web, we talked about PR in using those terms. The way to do PR is to do something remarkable and then let the world know about it. It's not just to, sit there and be the same as every other business and expect the New York Times to write about it.
So what other conversations are you hearing within the industry at conferences relating to, SEO, AI, and sort of future-proofing one's web visibility, or let's call it digital visibility, right? So that you can continue to run a business.
Yeah, I hear people talking about whether they're going to drop out of the industry at all, right? Like, we had a transition a while back from marketing to digital marketing, and now we're transitioning from digital marketing to AI marketing. And I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but then again, I don't mind sounding overly dramatic. Where 3, 4, 5 years from now, the industry really is going to look different, and it's moving. It feels like it's moving a little faster than it has in the past, and it probably will. But we do know that the difference between marketing and digital marketing was quite different, and there were some people that just didn't make that career transition.
Right.
So really, really, what I'm hearing people talk about is like, do I want to ride this new wave? And there's a lot of opportunity out there. If you are an AI enabled marketer, if you're in the 1%, like if you're using AI daily, like you're in the 1% right now. And if you ride that wave, you'll be way out ahead of your industry and your peers and your colleagues in your industry. But some people are like, hey, I'm just going to ride out the skills I have, and this might not be a wave that I want to catch, and that's totally fine. There are people that did that when digital marketing appeared, and a few years later, they kind of took a different job doing something else.
Right, right. Well, I still enjoy getting up every day and doing all the stuff that my team and I do, and it seems like you do as well. Um, let's talk about adoption curves a little bit, right? Because I sort of remember, maybe it was 12 or 13 years ago, like every year was the year of mobile, but then it wasn't. It was the next year, right? And sort of people's, percentage of time that they spent on smartphones, changed over time, and eventually that had implications from an SEO perspective, right? To where we reached sort of a mobile first tipping point, right? At the algo level, but it was really more the consumer behavior, right, that was driving that. So, you and I may use AI daily, which I certainly do. And then there may be a whole bunch of both United States and international folks who haven't even gotten around to really using chatbots yet, right? So, do you feel like that there's going to be like are we already at that sort of year of AI from a consumer perspective, or are we like way ahead, from an adoption perspective compared to the regular people?
Well, there's a lot of hype. We haven't even had the crash yet. It's like, Kevin, we got to get through the crash before we can say that, like, we've had the year of AI. But the thing is, when we do have the year of AI, we're not going to notice. And the reason why is because it's not about the underlying AI technology. It's about the use cases, how people are
Right.
using it, how it affects their work, their life. So there will come a time, like you can, and I'm guessing here, but you can imagine Apple and Android roll out killer AI applications that a couple billion people on the planet are using, and that's the year of AI right there. But you're not going to call it the year of AI. They're going to call it, I don't know what they're going to call it, the year of having your best friend in your pocket who's not actually a human, because that's what it's going to feel like, because that's the killer app, not the AI. It's just like with electricity. When they first started selling electricity, they weren't selling kilowatt hours; they were selling light hours, because that was the application. Light, you're paying for light, not electricity. And then eventually, when you got the infrastructure out there, you could use it to power a number of appliances that change people's lives. And AI is going to be the same way. We're getting chatbots out there, and we're building the infrastructure. We're building the know-how, and people just being used to chatting with this thing and having it be helpful. And then the data centers and all that infrastructure. But then once it's pervasive on mobile and my laptop and everywhere, then what are the applications that are built on top of it? Like, that's what matters. And one of those applications will be a killer app. And people forget about AI. It's the, I don't, I'm making things up, but it'll be the phone that spits out gold bricks. That's what I care about. Like, I don't care
Right.
if it's a combination of the internet and electricity and AI that's making it happen. But we'll get there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I went to a couple of AI conferences, including chairing one last week here at the Javits Center in New York City. But there was also one that Jeff Pulver had, who's been in the digital space forever. And in both of those, there were folks there really talking about the autonomous agents as sort of the next generation of AI, which is sort of like, you're giving a set of conditions to your autonomous agent that's you're telling it, oh, I'm willing to book a Caribbean cruise vacation if I can get it for one of these four islands and this range of dates for a suite that's of this size for this price, right? And then it's just going to wait until that deal is there, and it's going to go ahead and book it for you, right? Which of course changes the dynamics dramatically. Now we're not there yet, right? Because you empowering your autonomous agent with your credit card and ability to book something, that'll probably roll out slowly, where it'll just alert you, I found you the deal you want, please, and hit that final buy button, right? But the idea that you know the web and search removed a ton of friction, right, from the ecosystem. It certainly added price transparency. It used to be like, you know, you were at one furniture store looking at a mattress and you had no idea whether that was a good price or not, right? So now with so as long as the model number is the same or the description is the same, you have huge price transparency. And the autonomous agent layer, which is sort of the next generation as far as a bunch of AI researchers think, that could change the model entirely. Do you feel like the digital marketing and SEO community is ready for that generation of AI?
Yes and no. One thing that I think is really important is, like, when you're using AI and applying it to any type of marketing, there's some areas where it's going to work and other areas where it doesn't. And it's so key to really start to build that intuition around when should I use it and when should I not use it. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because when it comes to agents, there are two types of agents depending on who you talk to. Like, the technical definition of an agent is it's software that could plan or decide how it's going to execute a task, not just executing a task. So that would be something like, and I'm trying to use a different example than you used, but it might be like, find somebody who could program automobile steering wheels for me. And then what the agent would do is say, okay, first it would think about, well, how should I go about finding it? And then it would try something. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. It would try something else, and then until it can figure out something that actually works. And it'll say, okay, here's a person I think can program your automobile, or here's a person who can program your automobile steering wheel, right? But the fact that it's figuring out how to do the process is what makes it an agent. And so that's what people, I feel like, get confused about. And the reason why this is so important is because the other type of AI is more of an assistant, something like a custom GPT, where you give it instructions. It's not writing its own instructions. You're giving it the instructions, and you're giving it a knowledge base and maybe access to tools or an API to do what it needs to do. And the point that I'm really trying to make here is that the agents that basically write their own instructions or try a bunch of different things to figure out how to accomplish the task, those are wonderful in terms of what they could get done if they worked, but they don't. And so for marketers like us trying to adopt like the AI technology that we need to get our work done, agents are really at the frontier, because when an AI, whatever you want to call it, is writing its own instructions, it could get 1 out of 20 instructions wrong that sends it totally off in the wrong direction. And we know that they're not 100% accurate. So it's really hard to make those systems work. But if you contrast that with what I'm calling an AI assistant, where with something like a custom GPT, where you give it the instructions and access to some data and knowledge base, maybe some tools, maybe an API, that actually works. And that is insanely powerful. So I'm agreeing, Kevin, that eventually when agents work, they will be really valuable, but that's a lot of hype. The real opportunity for marketers right now is to focus on AI assistants like a custom GPT. Build as many of those as you can that are useful to you, because they work. It's really more about identifying the use cases at that point and then rolling them out. So that's about applying the technology we already have to get more results, rather than waiting it out or wishing that someday the technology companies are going to make these agents work. They probably will, but don't wait around for that. There's plenty that does work that you can use to get the job done today.
So, final question really relates to something that sort of exists within the SEO community, or has sort of gone through waves within sort of the SEO ecosystem, which is negative SEO, and also sort of SEO reputation management, where it could be that you actually did something bad and you're just trying to manage information that's out there on the web, and you were mainly concerned about it from a SERP perspective, right? And so now, obviously, the next generation of sort of digital reputation management is going to be AI bot reputation management, right? So if a person does a vanity search on your name, and you had a DWE 11 years ago, and that happens to come up #1 in the SERP, right? There's an entire ecosystem that, of businesses that maybe help you mitigate that, right? Do you see a secondary industry evolving for sort of improving reputation management as it relates to AI visibility?
Yeah, I think that's inevitable. And what I mean by inevitable is somebody will charge for that service. So you can write a check for it, sure. I'll give you my mailbox, I'll give you my address, after this call. But will it work is the problem. Like, it really depends on the footprint for the information that you're trying to overwhelm, because or at least LLMs, the way they work now, are going to average what's out there. So you'd want there to be a lot more information. Or you'd want to overwhelm the negative information with positive information. But what I would add to that is that these search platforms are changing, where they're not just an LLM. They're going to be grounded in search results, and that's how they're going to avoid hallucinations. So it circles back to reputation management. Really just feels like old school reputation management at the end of the day, to the extent that search algorithms are informing what generative AI is going to spit out. I think we're going to see more and more of that.
Yeah, a quick follow-up. I have noticed that particularly for long tail related AI conversations, right, into a very specific niche, correcting the AI when it has some misinformation, in a tiebreaker scenario, for example, two vendors who have a very similar product, or when you're asking an AI for a list of something, or adding something to that list, right, that belongs there, right? Again, from a meritocracy perspective, if it's a long tail related query, it doesn't take a whole lot of additional training for the AI to sort of start to include whatever was missing, right? But of course, the more sort of you get to the head of the AI search distribution, the harder it is to sort of manipulate. So for those folks who are sort of maybe in some kind of a niche business, and sort of they've gone through the best practices of content creation, they've got lots and lots of training data out there. The LLMs have ingested that training data, but now they sort of want to deploy some resources potentially into educating the LLM on, this is in fact, the best, MRI machine, or this is in fact the best photo spectrometer, or whatever it is, something super niche, super granular. Do you feel like there are some best practices evolving to that side of it, training the AI and using the human element of AI learning to craft the results?
Yeah, there definitely is. I think there's a distinction there, because what we're not talking about is erasing negative information or
Right.
information we don't like. So instead, what we're talking about now is gaps in the training. And filling gaps in the training is easier than erasing something, right?
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense, and it makes sense that the more information you get out there, the more places, the higher authority they are, that you can get the information you want to be slurped up into the training sets. Absolutely. And there are some techniques around looking at the sources that let's say the generative AI search engines are using, and then when you write your content to get your information out there, you make sure it's similar, in a semantic sense, using some algorithms we won't get into, to the sources that the generative AI search engines are choosing, because we know that they're choosing them because they've decided they're similar to the query in the right way. So
Right.
that's a technique that works much better with generative AI search than it does with like Google search. But I expect it to work less and less over time. But we'll see.
Right. Well, Dale, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with the audience, and for talking about where SEO and AI is now versus where it's going in the future. I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's always fun. So let's talk again.
Sounds good. Absolutely.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.